Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to For Future Generations. This is going to be a very interesting show. It's going to be the first time we've done this, but we're going to have a special to talk about the ARP, specifically a statement that they released this week, something that Sean found on Twitter, and he was showing me, and he said, "Man, this requires some special attention." And you know what? He's right. This absolutely needs some special attention. But wherever you are, we hope that you're doing well, and we appreciate y'all for joining us. I am Geoffroy Von Scott, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend Sean. Sean, how are you, man?
I'm good. As we talked about, I'm having my 12th wedding anniversary tomorrow. So look forward to spend some time with my wife. And so won't be recording live tomorrow. Tomorrow for us, it'll be like 2 days ago or whatever for when everyone else watches it. But
right. So if y'all are wondering, where did Sean go? What happened to him? He did not die. At least, no. At the time, as of the time of this recording, he is not yet dead. But anniversary, very special time, and happy 12th, man. That's awesome. That's a long time. So I tell people sometimes we had our 10th anniversary last year, and I was telling people then, in some ways it's like we got married yesterday. And I can remember it, it just two kids, fresh out of high school. Feels like, getting married. And at the same time, it also feels like, I've been married my whole life, mostly in good ways, mostly in a good way. It feels like that it's just been this way forever. But I wanted to address something that got brought to my attention. Sean, as always, being the very diligent man that he is, showed a tweet from a very annoying individual, Benjamin Glazer, or maybe it's Glasser. I'm not sure. I don't know this gentleman intimately or personally. I believe he has me blocked, if I'm not mistaken. But no, maybe not. So he's a little braver than most. But he posted a link to the ARP Special Committee report on kinism and race realism, and that's the link for that right there. And Sean and I figured that we would roll through this, just starting from the top, kind of working our way down.
For context, this is the guy that put that statement forward that like multiple other denominations went ahead and used like word for word. He was like bragging about it, and it was, I didn't expect this to get so big. And so, I mean, he's been at the forefront of this, purposely missing the point for some time now. Yeah. So I thought that this was really important because guys like Eli McGowan will use these statements and say, see, you are outside of the church because this statement condemns you. So,
right. And that is one thing that we will be bringing up several times, is that this statement very explicitly states that if you do believe X, Y, and Z, you are outside of the church. And one of the things that I want us to focus on as we walk through this is, would he have this same standard for other churches in other countries? And also, as I think we will point out several times, it oversteps the bounds of church quite often, to where he will say things that do not apply to the church at all, but actually are ramifications of the civil government and apply to the civil realm. And he will say, if X, Y, and Z, the country is not Christian, the church in that country is not Christian. And that's not to say that there are not things in the civil realm that are per se not or are per se Christian, such as the issue of abortion. Anyone listening to this podcast, I think, who's in majority agreement with us, would obviously say, yes, abortion is evil, abortion is not Christian. And any country that promotes or allows abortion is in that way not a Christian country. But he seems to apply, and I say he, this is actually the authors of this statement, which are multiple. They will say some things about rules in the civil realm that are not, do not misunderstand me, that are amoral positions, not immoral. Do not hear me wrong. I'm not saying immoral things, but amoral positions that they will then take a stand and say, if you believe X, Y, or Z, or if your country does X, Y, and Z, then you are not a true Christian.
Right. They bind the conscience of believers with things that are not necessarily moral or immoral one way or the other.
Yeah, and things that are not explicitly stated in Scripture. I mean, that has been the standard that I have used. I mean, there are beliefs that I hold to that are not explicitly held in Scripture. I am very conservative in dress, in morals, et cetera, et cetera. But those things are not explicitly stated in Scripture, and so I do not hold those over my brother as a moral standard to which he must be held in order for me to commune with him, in order for me to call him a brother in the faith. And that is not the behavior that these men are exhibiting. There are, as we will see, several things that they then use to bind the conscience of their brothers that I believe are quite illegitimate. But with that being said, do we need to give a little more history, or is that probably good enough for?
I think that's pretty good. They came up with a committee that was announced some time ago, and this is their report. So it's been anticipated, and it was finally put out. So I guess we'll just get right into it, because I know right off the rip they're talking about definitions of things.
Right. And so this is Index 10, Special Moderators Committee on Kinism and Race Realism.
Oh, there's your history right there.
Yeah.
How long is that part?
They met via Zoom on August 28th, 2025 at 2 p.m. via Zoom, November 6th, 2025, 2 p.m. via Zoom, blah, 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 blah. The people are Reverend Benjamin Glazer of Catawba Presbyterian. He was the chairman. Reverend Harrison Holbrook, Reverend Philip Mayberry, Reverend Andy Webb, Elder Victor Johnston, Elder Scott Joyner. The purpose of the Special Moderators Committee on Kinism and Racism is to present to the Synod a theological and pastoral answer to the recent teachings of a now deposed ARP minister and other online entities that are causing trouble in the pews. Thank you so much for giving actual definitions there. But in order to do that, the committee put together an executive summary and a more robust paper of our findings. The former and the latter are attached as Appendix A, Appendix B, respectively. Simply put, any idea that posits racial superiority as a basis for church or civil social order, note that, is to be seen as out of bounds with Christianity as a religion and as a source of truth, and is sin. So any idea that posits racial superiority as a basis for church or civil social order is out of the bounds of Christianity and is sin. Will they demonstrate that? Let us see. Will they even
so basically
that?
So let's what was the was it Stephen Wolfe who had asked someone, like, what is the most tame position that this denounces? Yeah, or something. How did he word it? He worded it.
And I don't remember the word. Yeah, the verbiage that he used, but it was to that effect. What is the mildest? What is the mildest belief that this then would anathematize.
Right. Because they're talking, first of all, racial superiority. So they're already kind of, I mean, I don't know about, I'm not going to.
They are already begging the question here.
Right. Like, I am not a white supremacist. For the same reason Jared Taylor says he is not a white supremacist. He's a white advocate. The reason I say that is because, like, I don't believe that white people are the best at every single category that you can be as a race of people the best at. There are some things I believe we're the best at. I believe that our music and art, etc., is the best. But you know what I mean? Like there's things that I believe are the best. I don't believe we're the best at everything. Like IQ wise, we're obviously not the best. Like,
yeah, I mean the Olympic mathematicians, whatever it is that competition is called, but every year or 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is, they have these math offs. I'm not a mathematician, not my bag, not my thing. Yeah. But China always wins.
Yeah. Well, like actually,
every single year China
they
wins.
Were like, the American team won, and
yeah, the American
all
team
Chinese
won.
Kids.
Yeah, and it's a bunch of American Chinese kids, Chinese Americans, right? They are ethnically Chinese. They are racially Chinese. Okay, that is quite obviously a superiority. All right,
but I bring that up.
Yeah,
I bring that up to say this for a very important, specific reason. I know that this statement is meant to condemn people like myself. I know that. They know that. They know that I know that. That I like this. This is not.
This is not done in good faith.
No, it's not. Like, so when they say like, oh, it's a racial superiority thing. Well, I guess my question would be, can we use race as the basis of civil social order at all? Because if not, then it's basically like you have to be a globalist or you're not a Christian. Yeah. If you're a nationalist, you're not a Christian. If you believe that nations should be based off what a nation is, the people of a common birth.
Yeah. I mean, it comes from the word natal.
Yeah. Like it, I mean, the idea of if you believe that America is the fatherland of any group of people, that would put you outside the church, according to this.
And we will look at that as we continue. We will see that. Yeah, but just want to touch this last bit of the introduction where they say this includes reaffirming the dignity of all human beings, regardless of their national origin, and their equality in calling and purpose in the eyes of their Creator for His kingdom and for the blessing of all in His grace. Now, all means all. What do they mean by all human beings? The dignity of all human beings. I'm willing to extend an olive branch here. I believe what they're saying is all categories of human beings, not literally all people, right? The dignity of a murderer on death row who raped and murdered an entire family of young people, that he does not have the same dignity as a human being as a child who has not committed any crime at all. Right. An innocent child has more dignity as a human being than a murderer on death row. That is straightforward, and I don't believe that's what they're trying to say. I believe what they're trying to say is groups of people, all types of people, regardless of their national origin, equality in calling and purpose in the eyes of the Creator for His kingdom and blessing of all in His grace. Blah de blah de blah.
Now let me say this: their equality. Oh, I was reading that, dude.
Oh, sorry.
Their equality in calling and purpose in the eyes of their Creator. Well, wait a second. God
are
doesn't
all
have
people. I mean, let's leave race out of it completely. Are any two people equal in calling and purpose in the eyes of the Creator?
Yeah, absolutely not. Obviously not. We need to take a step back as a society and talk about what the word equal means. right? When people say men and women are equal, what they think that means is like equal in some capacity, right? I mean, you and I don't even believe that much, unless you're getting to some basic thing that all human beings have, which is just a silly way of trying to argue. But when we talk about equal, that means this thing is this thing, right? X equals 1 means that the value of X is the same as the value of 1. Like,
it's not like it. It's not similar to it. It is per se the same.
So when we say their equality in calling and purpose, not everyone has the same calling. They wouldn't
or the
affirm
same
that,
purpose.
right? Do they feel that they are called to be pastors? Does everyone have that calling equally? We talk about purpose. Purpose is a word, man, dude. There's so much in Scripture that you can. The word that you, the Greek word for purpose that you get in like the New Testament is boule. Like that's basically the will of God, like the kind of will that only God has. Not everyone's equal in God's will for their life. You would think Presbyterians would be on top of this, right? Y'all Presbyterians are the ones that are trying to come at Lutherans like myself, and God is so sovereign that you can't sovereign or stray molecules and all this kind of stuff. But everyone's equal in calling and purpose in the eyes of their Creator. That does not make any sense. I think what they're trying to say is like equal in, well, like this dignity idea, right? Well, what does that mean? Like, I'm affirming that you're a human.
I mean, that is a very low bar.
Yeah. Is that what they mean by that? The dignity, right? Or do they mean like how Hollywood would say that, where no, everyone's history is equal. It makes sense. There's a such thing as Black ancient Greeks, right? I heard someone arguing for that on the internet. Like, it's not crazy that Helen of Troy would be Black because there were Black Greeks back then. Like, come on, dude. Like,
yeah. At some point, reality has to step in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, what is equality? What is dignity? There's going to be a lot of definitions coming up. I'm afraid there's not going to be a definition of what they mean by equal dignity and equal calling and equal purpose. But in order for it to be equal, it would have to be a very low bar.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the same kind of concept with communism. All right. If everybody's equal, the only way to make everybody truly equal is to make everybody equally poor. And if you're going to say that everybody has an equal calling or an equal purpose or an equal dignity, the only way to do that is to give a bottom row, make everybody equally deficient. And I don't think that's what they're intending to do. I don't think that's the intention of their verbiage, but that is kind of the logical outcome of it. So anyway, we will skip their recommendation section and begin with Appendix A, which is where the definitions begin. And I'm going to read this off. I'm going to read both of the first two definitions, which are kinism and race realism. And then I want to kind of comment on it because it is very odd to me the way that they have chosen to define these. But kinism, from the Kinist Institute, whoever that is, the belief that God has...
Hold on. Isn't that Audie's thing?
The link is at the bottom of the page, and it is webarchivekinism.net. I'm not sure who these people are, but the idea that you can just go to the guy who owns the webpage and be like, aha, this is what that means. If you go to 1689.com, you're going to end up reading a website written by a dorky little twink who screams at people for going to a megachurch and tells them they're all going to hell. That's not exactly a good representation of the organization of the confession of the faith. And but let's read the definitions, and we'll go ahead and get into how they arrived at what they arrived at, because I think it is very, very humorous, some of the things that come out of this. But kinism is the belief that God has ordained the existence of distinct ethnic and racial groups, and that these groups should be preserved and protected. ... It is the conviction that the love of one's own kind is a natural and biblical duty, and that the modern drive for multiculturalism and universalism is a rebellion against the created order. And that's according to kinism.com or .org, whichever it is. Then he goes on to define race realism, the doctrine that differences in human races extend beyond simply geography, appearance, and ancestry. Racial differences also include differences in virtues and vices, intelligence, a tendency to rule or be ruled, and a propensity toward different gods and religions. These racial distinctions are not just real, but immutably set and maintained by God. This means certain boundaries ought not to be crossed, including mixed-race marriages, mixed-race schools, and mixed-race churches. It also means racial slavery, racial segregation, and intentionally exclusive white leadership can be biblical and good. And the source they cite for that is the Pactum Institute, and they give a link to that here at the bottom of the page. But is it just me, Sean, or when we think of kinism and race realism, and I would not consider myself a kinist, although by this definition, I suppose maybe I would be. But this definition is so wide, you could drive a truck, and you could squeeze a whole planet into this thing.
Yeah, our buddy, I'm forgetting William Swallows had he basically screenshotted this, and I did the same thing. I was like, who doesn't believe this? Who is the man who would stand against this this definition? Yeah. This is so absurd to say that this is bad.
Yeah, but the thing I was getting to, Sean, is when we think of kinism and race realism, as people who are familiar with these concepts and actually debate people who hold to these positions, we tend to think of race realism as being the more mild form. Race realism, simply put, is just someone who believes race is real.
Yeah.
Right. And that there are consequences to that. Whereas kinism is someone who believes that it is immoral, or at least should be avoided. At least it is regrettable to associate with people who are not within your kin group. But the definitions they give here, kinism, and they will go on to say that kinism is a heresy, that if you believe it, you are not a Christian. So if we were to take this definition of kinism, Sean, and we were to just invert it, how would that sound? So the opposite of kinism would be the belief that God has not ordained the existence of any distinct ethnic or racial groups, and that no groups should be preserved or protected. It is the conviction that the love of one's own supposed kin is a unnatural and unbiblical command, and that the modern drive for multiculturalism and universalism is
not rebellion against the created order.
Is the work of God. So multiculturalism and universalism is the work of God. That would be the opposite of kinism. All right. So if kinism is non-Christian because God has not ordained distinct ethnic or racial groups, and no ethnic or racial groups should be preserved or protected, that is just very basic. If we take this outside of the context, which it is, where they're applying it to white Americans in the United States, let's take it over to, let's say, the Middle East. Let's drop it in Pakistan or Afghanistan, right on that border, the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Sean, you've been to Afghanistan. Are they a mono-ethnic culture?
No. Actually, they have cultures there that have the names of bordering countries. They have like, so Afghanistan means like land of the Pashtun, and there's Pashtuns there, but there's also like Uzbeks there, but they don't live in Uzbekistan. Like
there's Turks.
There's Turks. They don't live in Turkmenistan. Yeah, like there's all kinds of.
All right.
Yeah, it's
so
wild.
To be the opposite of a kinist, you would have to believe that there are no distinctions between those ethnic and racial groups, and that those ethnic and racial groups should not be preserved and protected. So there should be no groups fighting for the rights of Pashtuns in Afghanistan because that is against God's will.
I guess the thing that I've pushed back on some of these goofy definitions that people will try to put out, because like you said, like to me it seems like their definition of kinism and race realism are backwards. Because I would agree with really everything in their kinism definition, and maybe squabble about some things in their race realism definition. Maybe,
yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too. Is it's like if you apply this to Africa, is it wrong to preserve and protect the African races in Africa? So if the Hutu and the Tutsi are having a race war and they are trying to genocide each other, is the Christian position to stand back and say, hey, racial groups don't exist, distinct ethnicities are not a thing, and so we should not try to preserve and protect these ethnic groups? Is that the Christian position? Or would the Christian position be, no, you can't go genociding your neighbors because they're an ethnic group that deserves to be protected? You know, as a group, as a race, as an ethnos, they have the right to exist in their native land.
I just want to real quick run through kind of this kinism definition, because I'm trying to figure out what part of this they feel is so bad. The belief that God has ordained the existence of distinct ethnic and racial groups, and so let's stop there, because that first part, that can't be what they disagree with, right? The belief that God
Surely
has ordained,
not, because doesn't
the existence.
Genesis say that he has laid out the boundaries for the races? Now, obviously, in your English translation, it's probably not going to say the word race, because that was not a word that had been invented when the King James Bible was written. Instead, it's going to say the nations, but that is the same word. All right. So God created the boundaries for the native peoples, the ethnicities, the races, and he drew their boundaries.
That God has ordained these things. So I guess my question is, like, do you believe that God has ordained that Black people exist? Let's just get down to that, right? It's like when people try to say, like, oh, there is no such thing. Like, I had one of the new Christian intellectual guys try to tell me that there is no such thing as Black culture. And I would say, I dare you to go on Twitter and say Black people have no culture. I dare you. I would pay money to see that. So this one, like, has God ordained the existence of Black people? Well, clearly, because everything God ordains comes to pass if you're a Presbyterian, right? That's the idea. And then, okay, so I'm going to keep going. And that these groups should be preserved and protected. Should Black people be protected? Let's just get down.
Not. Evidently, if you
Evidently
believe that
not.
black people should be
Yeah.
protected, you're a kinist.
I'll ask you another one. Should the Native American tribes be preserved and protected? Or is it okay to just replace one ethnic group with another and there's no negativity in that, right? Because apparently we didn't actually kill any Indians, we just replaced them with people who are just as American as them, right? That's
Right.
the argument, right? So what is the argument against that? These groups should be preserved and protected. Well, okay, well you're a wicked person if you're just saying like, no, we shouldn't protect humans. Like, come on, dude. What is the argument for this? It's the conviction that the love of one's own kind is a natural and biblical duty.
Should we hate our own kind?
This is the C.S. Lewis thing where he talks about how they love everyone in general and nobody in particular, right? If I say I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but I can't love any neighbor in particular, how am I supposed to love my neighbor, right? I can't just love the idea of my neighbor, right? I can't just love the idea of my family.
Yeah. Loving your neighborhood and
family.
hating the guy who lives in the house next door is not a real thing.
Right. And then this last part is just, it's a true head scratcher. I don't even know how to put the best construction on this. And that the modern drive for multiculturalism and universalism is a rebellion against the created order. So are they against
universalism not a rebellion against the created order?
Yeah, what is the...
I thought universalism was a known heresy since the time of the early church.
Yeah, the modern drive for multiculturalism, because like these people wouldn't even say that they like multiculturalism, right? Like they would just say they would just say, oh, we like multiracial monoculturalism. That's what they would argue that they like. Well, I just want all of the people to breed until they're gray and then worship Christ as gray men. Like that's what we want. So you're not even for multiculturalism. So why are you putting that in universalism? Whatever that means in this context, I imagine what that means is globalism.
Yeah, I think they're not referring to the heresy of everybody goes to heaven, which is what universalism actually means. I think what they mean is globalism, which is, one world culture, one world economy.
Yeah.
Which is the Tower of Babel. I mean, that quite plainly is a rebellion against the created order. Unless you believe that, Christ's death and resurrection is, has instituted the Tower of Babel in the modern age, which I don't think they make that. And that this is one thing I think we're going to see as we continue reading this paper. They don't ever seem to make a positive case. It's just, hey, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to inverse this definition right off the bat is, okay, if this definition is bad, what are you saying is good?
Yeah.
But let's move on to the next definition, which I think is, and they're pulling these from the people who say they hold to these positions, which I think is why the definition on kinism is so mild and the definition on race realism is so hard, is because they're pulling these from people who have websites who define their positions, and they pull the definition for race realism from, as I said earlier, the Pactum Institute, which is more of a hardline website than, I guess, kinism.com or kinism.net is, because it's had more years to kind of iron out the language and make it more palatable. But let's hit this definition right here. Race realism is the doctrine that differences in human races extend beyond simple geography, appearance, and ancestry. So first off, the first one, geography. do differences in human races extend beyond geography? Well, obviously that's true, because you have people in the same geography who have lived in the same geography for thousands of years. Example, Afghanistan, Africa, everywhere. People who have lived next to each other who are still very much distinct ethnically, who are racially distinct, linguistically distinct, and appearance. So these differences extend beyond geography, obviously, beyond appearance. Okay, so because two people look different, that there's more difference than merely appearance, and ancestry. Okay, so that one is a bit odd to me, because
There is
ancestry carries a lot of water.
Yeah, nobody believes. No, the hardest racist, race realism, whatever believer does not believe that the doctrine that differences in human races extend beyond ancestry. No, nothing extends beyond ancestry. That doesn't make sense. Nothing extends beyond DNA. That's what we're saying is the basis of race. Nobody is arguing
nationalism, which comes from the word natal, ethnicity, which comes from the word ethnos. Those all have to do with ancestry. That is the difference. And again, they're pulling the definition from Pactum, and maybe this is something I've not read their website extensively, but maybe they're pulling that from the writing there. If so, I would encourage whoever it is that is doing the writing over there, writing the definitions, to maybe tighten that up, because that is, at best, really sloppy.
Well, they don't seem to have quoted it. They quote it in the first one. There's actually quotation marks.
Right. There's quotation marks. These are not quotation marks. These are summaries. And I mean, I want to extend the benefit of the doubt that they are doing their best to provide a coherent summary. But the rest of the writing in this paper is not inspiring me with the confidence to do that. But let us continue. Racial differences also include, now mind you, this is bad, all right? This belief is bad. Racial differences also include differences in virtues and vices, intelligence, a tendency to rule or be ruled, and a propensity toward different gods and religions. So let's start with that first one. Racial differences also include differences in virtues and vices. So, for example, if you said that a certain racial group were, I don't know, all liars, thieves, gluttons, that is unchristian. If you said a racial group had a propensity towards being liars, gluttons, slow, lazy bellies, then that is against the beliefs of Christ. You must believe that no race actually has differences in virtues and vices to be a Christian. Does that ring a bell, Sean?
Yeah. I mean, it's what it is to me. This whole sentence, it's tabula rasa thinking. It's the idea that everyone's born a blank slate, and it's really just a matter of what you happen to get slathered on you throughout your life. Because if you really break this down, racial differences also include virtues and vices, intelligence, tendencies, and propensities. Yeah, these are all things that are downstream of ancestry, whether it be DNA, just strict DNA, or the way that people with certain DNA have raised their children generation after generation, which is where you get the propensity towards different gods and religions. So that's something like Corey Mailer talks about, right? So that's not just like a made up idea, but if you think about it, the propensity towards different gods and religions. Yeah, after so many generations of worshiping demons, there's a spiritual aspect to what is happening with this people group.
Yeah, I mean, the
Right?
difference between Haiti and what is the other half of that island, Hispaniola
Cuba?
called? No, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. All right, so Haiti and the Dominican Republic at one point were one people group, right? There are multiple different African nations that were brought in, enslaved by the French and English at different times, and turned into this kind of homogenous group of African slaves who worked these sugarcane plantations. The country is now, or the island is now, divided in half into two distinct nations that now see themselves as two distinct ethnicities. And I think absolutely should, because if you look at those countries, first off, the Dominican Republic is not a paradise. All right. It is a third world country. People live in mud huts. It is not a great place. But compared to Haiti, it is heaven on earth. And one of the main differences between Dominicans and Haitians is that the Haitians, when they revolted against their white masters and they murdered them, raped and murdered their entire race of whites on that island, they pledged themselves to demons. They literally called on demons and swore themselves fealty to those demons, just like the Jews did when they killed Christ and said, his blood be on us and on our children. They swore themselves and their posterity to these demons. Whereas the Dominican Republic, which is a primarily Christian country, I mean, that's not to say they don't have problems and that their theology is great. They're very different.
Yeah.
And that is because of hundreds of years at this point, hundreds of years of difference of one half of that island being a at least nominally Christian republic, and the other half being a demonic tribal just war bands fighting each other constantly. And the effect of that generationally will have real ramifications throughout the ethnicity, throughout the inheritance that these people inherit from their parents, culturally and genetically. I mean, that just like God's grace perfects our nature, depravity hurts our nature. But if you believe, evidently, I mean, let's do the same thing that we just did with kinism, right? Where we flipped it around. Let's do that here and say, okay, so if you're a Christian, what that means is you must believe that differences in human races do not extend beyond simply geography, appearance, and ancestry. You must believe that racial differences do not include differences in virtue and vices, intelligence, or a tendency to be ruled or rule, or a propensity toward different gods and religions. In order to be a Christian, you must believe that there are no racial differences in intelligence. This is something that is scientifically observable, testable, and repeatable. Intelligence is 0.8 heritable. All right? That is as nearly perfect as you can get. Okay, that means intelligence is more heritable than eye color. All right, eye color is like 0.5 or 0.6 heritable. Okay. 1 means like 100%, right? And there really isn't anything that is 1-to-1, a full 1. If you have a low intelligence father and a low intelligence mother who both have low intelligence heritage, all right, and leaving race out of this completely. Let's say you're Polish, all right, and you live in Poland, and everybody in your town is Polish.
Yep.
All right.
And it takes the whole town to screw in a light bulb and
okay. Yeah. And like, one to hold the light bulb and one on each side of the ladder to turn it around. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. The kid who has a dumb dad, who has a dim father and a not intelligent mother, that father who has that not intelligent heritage, and he marries a girl who is also dim-witted, they will have a child who is not a rocket scientist. All right, that is pretty predictable. Okay, that is not something that you even have to bring into race to observe. Okay, you can observe that within a race. And then if you extend that beyond to people groups that are larger, to larger ethnicities, like we were talking about at the beginning of the program, the Chinese dominate the mathematics competitions. Okay. Chess is dominated by Nords and Russians, but mostly by Nords. I mean, the majority of
these days, yes, historically Russians for sure.
Yeah, historically Russians and Western Europeans. I mean, you get a couple of very intelligent Indians and Persians who show up in that as well. I mean, the game comes out of ancient Persia, so that's not really surprising. But to believe that there isn't a racial component to intelligence, it is absurd. I mean, this is observable. We can know this just with our own eyes, and you are telling us that if we can observe that certain kinds of intelligence cannot have a racial component to them, that if you believe that, then you are not a Christian. That's pretty wild. Like we said about virtues and vices, I mean, the Apostle Paul says that Cretans, people from Crete, Cretans exist today. Okay, that is an extant ethnicity, and it was at the time of Paul's writing as well. If Paul could say that they are liars, that they are evil beasts, slow bellies, that they are gluttonous, if you can say that, then you're not a Christian. That's pretty wild. Anyway, getting out of the inverse, continuing the definition provided here, these racial distinctions are not just real, but immutably set and maintained by God. Okay, so hold on. Are they saying that you can believe they're real, but they're not immutably set and maintained by God?
Nobody. So I don't know a single person who argues that these things are immutably set and maintained by God. I don't know a single person who argues that. If what you're trying to say is with one person that those are immutably set, well, obviously God can change the heart of one person. What people like myself, who this is obviously against, might argue is that these things don't change overnight. That, you know, an evangelist doesn't just walk into Haiti and suddenly everyone's just like, I give up eating mud, right? Like their little mud snacks that they eat and whatever. Like, I'm going to build a McDonald's because the evangelist came in and brought the gospel to me.
This isn't something that changes overnight, like you're saying. I mean, an evangelist can't walk into Haiti and then 20 years later they're building skyscrapers and they're a first world country with an economy that rivals China. I mean, common sense tells you that's not how that works.
Yeah.
Okay. But immutably set and maintained by God, to what end? To what extent? I mean, even the debate that Corey Mahler had with Dr. White, which I found myself listening to that debate, agreeing with neither one of them. Corey Mahler took the position, and it ended up being an argument over definitions more than anything. But the position was taken that God cannot, let's see, what was the exact verbiage? He cannot redeem, or was it... Anyway, the gist of it was that sanctification of Black people is not, that God does not sanctify the average Black person as much as the average white person. And Mahler's position, even his position, the radical position that I didn't actually agree with, even he said, for the sake of argument, we're going to leave out the outliers.
Right.
Well, if you're leaving out the outliers, then even Cory Mahler, the evil, racist Cory Mahler, doesn't believe that these things are immutably set and maintained by God, because he believes in outliers.
Right.
I mean, that kind of shoots this whole definition full of holes. And then it continues, this means certain boundaries ought not to be crossed. Ought not to be crossed. Very interesting verbiage there. Very loose verbiage, actually.
Not cannot be crossed.
Mm-hmm. Which include mixed race marriages, mixed race schools, mixed race churches. Okay,
I want to pause right there, because ought not to be crossed, that verbiage means like it is good practice. It is meet and right to do so. Like it is beneficial to do these things, or to not cross these boundaries. I can tell you right now that these are all things that are in keeping with good order, at the very least.
Public order.
You know what? Yeah. Even Doug Wilson said with mixed race marriages, Doug Wilson, of all people, the anti-racist Jew Doug Wilson, came out and said, well, you can have a mixed race marriage, but just, be wise about it. There's going to be issues that you may not be thinking of when you do this. Like, even he is saying, like, there is a line that you are crossing. Make sure you know what you're doing when you do that.
Yeah, make sure you're going into this with your eyes open.
Yeah.
That the ramifications, there will be consequences. Not that those things can't be overcome, but that there will be issues that will have to be resolved that in other marriages you wouldn't have.
Mixed race schools. Mixed race school. Let me talk about that. Has that benefited? Well, it certainly has not benefited white people. I'll tell you that. It's benefited nobody. It's the communism thing, like you were saying again. The only way to make everyone equal in a school is to lower the test scores of the best people. And the people who, again, contra the white supremacy label, you know what race has the best test scores? Everyone knows the answer to that. It's Asians. Everyone knows the answer to that.
Yep.
There's not a debate about it. It's one of those things where if you can say the good things about a non-white race, you can say those stereotypes. You just can't say the mean ones. So everyone knows that. In fact, I was in high school and we had this group come in and basically like stay there at the school for like 2 weeks, and they were like looking for problems with the school and like what they could fix and blah blah blah. And our teachers literally, like, this is in high school, like we understand what's going on in the world at this point. We're not just kids. They were like, well, they don't think that the Hispanic students are doing well enough. And one of the Hispanic students, somebody that I was, friends with, it was just like, isn't that racist? And he's like, no, dude, like you guys aren't good at school. Like what, I don't know what to tell you. Like we have the testing. We've shown you guys are not doing well. We need to make you do better. If that's on us, then that's on us. If it's on you, it's on you. But the fact of the matter is you're not doing as good as everyone else. So them's the facts. Like that's what it is.
I mean,
So
just this week there was a school that was talking about how their SAT scores went way up this year. Unfortunately, they saw a drop in non-whites taking the SAT.
oh yeah,
And it was the same article. It was part one of the article, we're really proud of the fact that the SAT scores have gone up. Part two of the article, we're really bummed about the fact that it's a lot more white children taking the SAT than there were last year.
Yeah. Weird.
Man, I wonder if those things are happen to be related.
Then you
And
have
notice
mixed race churches.
Notice
That one.
before we get off of schools, one thing I want to talk about too, just to note in passing, your intelligence and your SAT score don't have anything to do with salvation.
Yeah.
At all. Have you noticed how many of the atheists, the world-renowned atheists that are like astrophysicists who absolutely hate God are astrophysicists or scientists of this and that and the other, highly intelligent people going to hell. Okay. Whereas the janitor in the building that he works at might be some really dumb guy of whatever race he might be. He might be Dominican, he might be Russian, German, English, doesn't matter. But he's the janitor. And he's not the janitor because he's smart. Okay? He's the janitor because he's not an astrophysicist. And God gave them the intelligence he gave them. Right? He gave to people different abilities, but that doesn't actually have any effect on their salvation. They're completely unrelated things. And that is something that I want you to keep in mind as we continue reading through here, that they are slipping something into doctrine of salvation that has nothing to do with sanctification, glorification, forgiveness of sin, a heart that is pure. It doesn't have anything to do with that. And getting into what are those categories? The next thing they talk about is mixed race churches. Salvation. We're talking about how intelligence doesn't really play a role in that, right? Like the book that became kind of a funny meme going around, May the Retarded Receive Communion, right? It's like, well,
yeah. No, the book was helping the retarded to find God or something like that.
Yeah. It's like, God, I went to church with a retarded man for over 10 years, and he was as sweet as the day is long. He was not a theological giant. He confused the category of Santa Claus and God. All right. He could not in his mind make a distinction between the two. Okay. I do not believe for 1 second that man went to hell. He was retarded, mentally retarded. I'm not saying that to denigrate him or be unkind. He was clinically retarded. He had the intelligence of like a 5-year-old. This man was in his 70s when I knew him. I was a teenager. And he was a good Christian man. Okay? Why is that a problem? If somebody said, hey, he is unintelligent, genetically he was built this way, God didn't make a mistake. These are the consequences of sin in our blood from Adam that caused this to happen to him. But God did not accidentally do this to him. And yet God changed his heart and made him into a Christian. All right. It's just, it is mind-boggling. This means certain boundaries ought not to be crossed, such as mixed race churches.
That's such a funny, the idea of mixed race churches is so funny to me because like just today I drove by a Korean Baptist church and Chinese Baptist church. And I had the funny thought of like, you know how, our guys will be like, oh, I'm Dutch Reformed or something, but they're not like racially Dutch.
Yeah, it's
Like I was just imagining like a white guy being like, oh,
yeah.
Yeah, but I just imagine like a white dude going, being like, "Oh, I'm Chinese Baptist. Oh, what are the distinctives of Chinese Baptists?" Like as if it's like a confession of faith that came out of China. Yeah, but no, you go past it, and it's a bunch of Chinamen or a bunch of Koreans or whatever the version of that church is. I want to say in my city, there's a Vietnamese Baptist church, something like that. It's always Baptist. Baptist
or
are very
Methodist.
racially segregated.
Where I live, it's a lot of Korean Methodist churches, and then there's even a Korean OPC church, and it's Korean OPC. Right? It is part of the OPC, but on the sign it says Korean OPC. And I have a coworker whose wife is Korean. He goes to a Korean OPC church. He's not Korean. He is actually Peruvian. His wife is Korean. His son is half Korean, half Peruvian, but he looks like a Korean. And they go to this Korean church. And he came to me the other day, and I thought this was very funny. He came to me the other day, and he's a good dude. Not very intelligent. He's kind of a little slow. But he had this this angst because his son was offered a job in a Korean. So I believe it's Samsung is a Korean company, right? And Samsung has a chip center where they make microchips. And they came to his son and they're like, "Hey man, would you like a job in our facility?" And it was obvious the reason that they were headhunting him was because he's Korean, because his degree is in like ocean biology. Right? He's got a degree in ocean biology, and he was going in for continuing education in this degree path that he had for himself. And they're offering him a job in tech. Now, he's not stupid in tech. He's a very intelligent young man. This guy, this Korean guy, but they're obviously hiring him because he's Korean. And I told my friend, I said, well, look, the reason they're doing that is because, especially in microchip manufacturing, they have to guard security. And they're constantly having to keep people from stealing their intellectual property and trying to sell it to, for example, China. And if they let Chinese people work there, like we see in California with all the Chinese mayors and governors and whatnot over there that are constantly turning out to be Chinese spies, well, if you grab a Korean, you don't have that problem. And so I told him, look, it's a good job. He's smart. He's capable. It's not his degree path, but that doesn't really matter. They think he's a good fit for the job. He should take the job. Well, is it wrong for Koreans to prefer Koreans in their Korean company manufacturing microchips in the United States? Not really. It's kind of a smart thing to do, if you ask me. And I'm not Korean. I mean, I don't even have a degree. I know nothing about tech. I would be an awful fit for that job. I'd probably do okay. I mean, I'm intelligent. I could figure it out. But he's going to be a much better fit for that job than I am because he's Korean. Because they prefer to have Koreans working with Koreans in a Korean company for security reasons, for cultural reasons, for ethnic bond reasons. Is that a bad thing? And the same thing happens with these mixed race churches where you get black churches that just happen to be black predominantly, right? Most of the time, there's not a sign on the door that says no whites allowed. Yeah. Or we hate Chinese or anything like that.
Or it just says Black Baptist Church. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't usually happen. It usually says something like, you know, Tree of Life Baptist Church, Pastor Apostle James Williams, right?
In the Army, what did they call it? They called it gospel. Was that what it was? Gospel church? It was something like that. They had like a euphemism.
Yeah. And that's
they
what
had
it
like
is,
a euphemism for it, and it was like that's the black
we all
soldier
know what that
church.
is.
That's what that is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah.
You know, if the Koreans want to have a Korean Methodist church and then down the street have a Korean OPC church that are per se on the door, it says Korean. And then to have a black church down the road that doesn't even say, hey, we're a black church. But they are. I mean, the way they worship is very African. They have a different way of doing it, not a heretical way of doing it. I mean, they're much more vocal. They're much more animated. Even if they're not Pentecostals, they act kind of like Pentecostals. And my German blood revolts against that. I mean, I like going into church and it being quiet. I like people sitting down and not even smiling. All right, that's just kind of ethnically what I'm hardwired to appreciate. But that is not an issue of salvation, as this paper is trying to make it. So you can't have non-mixed race churches. You can't have mono-ethnic churches, or else you're not a Christian. And then it continues. It also means racial slavery, racial segregation, and intentionally exclusive white leadership can be biblical and good. And they give a citation there, but like Sean, you pointed out, that's not in quotes, right? These are summaries. So racial slavery, racial segregation, and intentionally exclusive white leadership. Well, first off, racial slavery is in the Bible.
Yeah. So it can be biblical and good, is what you're saying.
It's certainly not anti-biblical and evil if God put his stamp of at least permissibility, if not approval, on it. Then racial segregation. To what extent?
Yeah.
You know, if you...
Nationalism.
For example...
Anti-globalism. That's what
Sean,
it is.
I think you and I would both agree, and I think most people, even the radical people who are supposedly such evil race realists, I think most of them would agree that if you have a law that is different, a law that punishes crime differently based on your race, that would be immoral. Right? The Old Testament talks about how the law needs to be just and it needs to be equal for the native and the foreigner, right? But it's talking specifically about judicial punishment, right? It's not talking about things like inheritance and property ownership. I mean, if you had a law in your country that said people who are not of our ethnicity cannot own property, they have to rent it. For example, let's say in the Philippines, they say only Filipinos can own property. If you're an American, you can't own the land, you can only rent it. Is that evil and anti-Christian? Is that something that means that you're not a Christian if you support those laws? If in China they say, okay, these are, the 5 races of Chinese, and if you're not one of these races, if you're Japanese, then you can't vote. Is that anti-Christian? And you and I would both agree that if you said, okay, Li here is Chinese and Huang here is Vietnamese, they both commit murder. Well, because Li is Chinese, we're going to give him 5 years. And because Huang is, or Nguyen, whatever his name is, because he's Vietnamese, he's going to get executed. I mean, that would be wrong. That would be immoral, right? Because it's unequal weights and balances, which God detests. But if they said something like, well, Nguyen cannot own a Fortune 500 company in China, or whatever their equivalent of a Fortune 500 company is in China, because he's not Chinese, who really would have a problem with that? Is that an anti-Christian law? But that is a form of racial segregation, right? If you have laws that certain people are not allowed to do certain things in your country, that is a form of racial segregation. It's not water fountain segregation, but it's a form of segregation. Is it all bad? Every instance of it? And then this last line, intentionally exclusive white leadership can be biblical and good. So if you are English and you want the King of England to be exclusively English, that is anti-biblical and bad?
Crazy, right?
Is that what you're saying? Okay, well, maybe he doesn't have to be English, but he has to be at least European, right? Maybe he can be Hanoverian. Maybe he can be Burgundian. But, we want the King of England to be, at least in appearance, looking close to English, right? King George, famously, Hanoverian, right? He was not an Englishman. He didn't even speak good English.
What was it? Prince Philip was that his name? Is that the guy I'm thinking of? Is from Greece or something like that?
Yeah, I mean well, I don't know if he technically himself was Greek. I believe he was Austrian.
He was part of that monarchy, though, right?
But he was in the Greek royal family. Yeah, and it's because Austria, Hungary, and Greece used to kind of blend their royal families, if I'm not mistaken. But the dad of the current King of England is not an Englishman, but he was white. Is it wrong? Is it immoral for the English people to desire that for their monarch? I mean, how much more of a leader can you be than a monarch of a nation? Is it okay if we were to transpose this to, let's say, the Congo? Right? You've got this tribe of Congolese people, and they say, hey, we want our leader to be Congolese. Or at least if he's not Congolese, we want him to be one of these ethnicities that are at least our cousins, that are close by, that are African. And if some Frenchman rolls in, or some Belgian rolls in, and he's like, okay, I'm going to marry the royal princess, and now, my children will rule over the Congolese, and the Congolese are not happy about that. If they're opposed to that, is that anti-biblical? Is that anti-Christian of them? Are they not Christians because they don't desire that for their people? That seems to be what they are saying. But of course, the context is only ever white people in America. They don't extend any of these categories beyond that. White people in America cannot desire this because it's bad. But I guess if you're Congolese, or if you're Japanese, or if you're Chinese, or if you're Afghani, I guess it would be okay. But if you're a white person in America, then no, you can't. So those are the definitions they give for kinism and racism, and then they give us kind of a history. Where did kinism and its close counterpart of race realism come from? So I'm going to read this next section, and Sean, interrupt me at any point. But we're just going to plow on through. While kinism is partly a synthesis of certain line of 19th century Southern Protestant thought and 20th century racial separatism, it arises today from an internet subculture of Dutch South Africans, former US-based Reconstructionists, and loosely connected bloggers. The main web organs have been Faith and Heritage, now preserved on Antelope Hill, Tribal Theocrat, and Iron Inc. Race realism is best exemplified by the magazine American Renaissance and its parent institution, New Century Foundation. It currently arrived in NAPARC circles mostly from the writings of Brett McAtee, which I believe Iron Inc. is his outfit. If I'm mistaken on that, correct me, but I'm not an expert there. The writings of Brett McAtee, Michael Spangler, and the Pactum Institute, which Michael Spangler is the Pactum Institute. I mean, there are other people there as well, but that's primarily his outfit. Its presence in the ARP was first noticed through an ecclesiastical investigation of two former ministers in Grace Presbytery, Michael Hunter and Eric Hancox. We had Michael Hunter on our program, and if you're interested, you can go watch that. It was episode 15. We did that more than a year ago at this point, but we talked to him about his pseudo-excommunication, why it was not actually an excommunication. He left in good standing and then was excommunicated after he was already no longer a part of that group. Eric Hancox, I'm not familiar with his situation. Maybe I should have done more research on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar situation. Other members and former members of the ARP were engaged in the support of kinism and race realism on X, Twitter, and other internet platforms. The statement made at the 2025 ARP General Synod was in response to the growing influence of these men. All right, so you've named essentially four people: Brett McAtee, Michael Spangler, Michael Hunter, and Eric Hancox. Okay, so the ARP is responding to these four people. Okay, our paper under consideration at the 2026 General Synod will help the ARP's response to such teachings. So the intention of this paper that they're writing is in response to these four individuals. And then in this definitions, they now move on to the section Scripture. Does kinism align with God's word? All right. So this is the hard-hitting stuff right here. No, kinism is backwards theology. It is man trying to justify his own prejudices with the Bible rather than letting his prejudices be transformed by it. That's a strong statement. I really appreciate for the first time them coming out and saying something strong. Let's see if they actually substantiate.
Yeah, notice that there's no option for some prejudices are good and should be maintained.
Right. I mean, one of my favorite works of fiction, and I know I'll get dragged for this, but one of my favorite works of fiction is called Pride and Prejudice. All right, and the entire book is about how there are two people, a man and a woman, who are both very proud and very prejudiced, and how some of those prejudices are correct and some of them are incorrect. It's not, the book is not about how pride and prejudice are both bad things that needed to be overcome. It's about how the prejudices they had and the pride in themselves and their families played a role in how their interactions with each other ended, spoiler, in them getting married. All right, if you haven't read the book yet, you should, but I don't think I'm spoiling anything by telling you that they get married in the end. I think most people kind of knew that. By the time the people were introduced, it was kind of understood that, It wasn't a secret. Okay, but all prejudices are bad, I guess. And our prejudices should all be transformed. So let's see how they substantiate this as we continue reading. There are a number of New Testament passages that speak directly to the ethnic unity and fellowship commanded in the church. All right. Excellent.
Okay. Pause on that really quick. There's a number of New Testament passages that speak directly to the ethnic unity and fellowship commanded in the church. Race realism does not undermine that. Kinism does not undermine that.
Yeah, at no point so far, even in this, have they said,
by their own definitions, it does not undermine that. I don't understand the mix-up here. The idea that I could not worship with someone from another political entity because we are not integrated into the same political entity, that is absurd. It's absurd on its face. It doesn't make a lick of sense. They're trying to say that this is so constant in this whole discussion.
And what you're saying is they don't actually substantiate that this contradicts any of the definitions that they just gave.
Right.
So Ephesians 2, let's read it real quick. Ephesians 2, 11 through 14. And I'm going to share the screen for this, because why don't we just read along here? So Ephesians 2, 11 through 13. Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands, that at the time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you, who once were far off, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Okay. So what is that passage saying? Well, let's read the next verse.
Well, he goes to 14, yeah.
For he himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation. And actually, I want to continue on a little bit further. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity. And he came and preached peace to you who were afar off and to those who were near. So he's explicating how this is a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. For through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. Okay. So
go back to the statement. Pull that up again.
Give me a second to pull this up, because I'm having to jump around back and forth. But so Ephesians 2 says that there's ethnic unity and fellowship in the church. I mean, I don't really disagree with that statement. And it says, which depicts the boundary in the temple between the court of the Gentiles and Israel's inner temple having been knocked down, thus restoring Jews and Gentiles. And actually, it's not really a restoration as much as a new creation. Restoring Jews and Gentiles, who are notably two separate ethnic groups. Are they? Okay, so you are admitting that they are two separate ethnic groups. So this is not just a homogenization of ethnicities. to real fellowship before the Lord. Okay, so Sean, the Korean Baptist church that you drove by in your town today,
Mm-hmm.
do you have real fellowship with them before the Lord?
I mean, we're both in Christ, ostensibly, right? Like, I don't
Right?
see why not. Until proven otherwise, I would assume that their faith is genuine.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah.
Does that mean you are a Korean Baptist? Huh.
No, I don't think so.
I think those distinctions are still there. I think the fellowship before the Lord is very real. And yet there are still distinctions, a notable separate ethnic distinction, as he gives us in this clause here. Then he says the effects of this barrier falling are shown in Acts 10, where Jewish Peter is taught by God to keep company with and share a table with the Gentile Cornelius.
Let me do my theology thing here real quick, because this is all over the place. There are a number of New Testament passages that speak directly to the ethnic unity and fellowship commanded in the church. The ethnic unity and fellowship that we have is that we are all one in Christ. That does not mean that we are all Americans, right? That does not mean that we're all Chinese or we're all whatever.
What it does mean, we're all Christians.
Yeah, we're all Christians, right? I understand that is the most important bond that you can have with somebody is to be a brother in Christ. I understand that. That does not mean that is the only bond that you can have with someone. It also doesn't mean that it supersedes every other bond so that everyone is just gray man, right? I understand the idea that that's the most important bond you can have. But I'm still an American. Like, that doesn't change that. I don't write in my census, oh yeah, I'm a, what's your ethnic background? Oh, I'm a Christian. What's your nationality? Christ, duh. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then to bring in Ephesians 2, it's just, it completely, we understand there's ethnic unity in that ethnicities still exist and we are one in Christ for those of us who are in Christ. But this idea, which depicts the boundary in the temple between the court of the Gentiles and Israel's inner temple having been knocked down. When was that knocked down? What are you talking? Because what they're trying to say is they're trying to reference the veil between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the temple. That is not the boundary that they're referring to right here.
No, it's not.
That's not the same boundary.
What's more, when the veil was torn, the reason was because God was leaving the temple. Okay, God was leaving the temple. It was fulfilled. The purpose of the temple had all to do with the arrival of Christ, and now that he was the once for all sacrifice for the saints, the temple sacrifices were no more. No blood, no altar now. The sacrifice is o'er. Right? That's why it was torn in two, is because Jesus Christ was that final sacrifice, the only sacrifice that man could have. That didn't have anything to do yet with the ethnicities being brought in, because that wouldn't happen until Pentecost. That wouldn't actually happen until Cornelius. Right?
Here, continuing with where I'm going with this, is that when they say thus restoring Jews and Gentiles, who are notably two separate ethnic groups, other Presbyterians, you got to talk about your covenant theology thing with these guys, because the idea that the difference between a Jew and a Gentile is an ethnic difference is, I know for a fact that is not in keeping with Presbyterian understanding of covenant theology. I know for a fact that is not. The idea is that some are in that covenant, some are not in that covenant. And then those who were not in that covenant are brought into that covenant. This isn't, oh, we're all going to hold hands and sing We Are the World. And that's not, I don't understand this idea of that the difference between Jews and Gentiles is just ethnicity. That's not the case. It's you're standing before God. You who were once far off, right? That doesn't mean like far off, like in China. It means far away from God. You are being brought in to this community,
to the presence of God himself through the sacrament.
This isn't saying like, oh, you who were once far off from America, once you who were not Americans, you know, through the glorious paperwork, you're now Americans, and we're all Americans together in this gray man racial homogeneity. Like it's so weird that they're mixing the things that they do. It's just weird. The effects of this barrier falling are shown in Acts 10, where Jewish Peter is taught by God to keep company with and share a table with the Gentile Cornelius.
Also, that is not notice how they're sneaking something in there, right? Peter is taught by God to keep company and share a table with the Gentile Cornelius. They are saying, without saying, that people who identify as kinnists or race realists will not share a table with someone who is not of their kin or race.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Is that true? That hasn't been substantiated. Has kinism.net or pactuminstitute.com, have those websites said that white Christians cannot eat with African Christians or Korean Baptists or Chinese Anglicans? Where is that in their definition? I didn't see that in the definition that you just gave, but you're just assuming that is part of it. Unfairly, I will say. I mean, I don't know all of these people personally. So I don't know if Pastor Spangler would refuse to eat with an African-American Christian, but I kind of doubt it.
I would be shocked if that was true.
Yeah, I would know that Pastor McAtee would not eat with a Korean Baptist. I mean, he might not eat with him because he's a Baptist.
Yeah.
Because Pastor McAtee is not very fond of Baptists.
Yeah.
But would he refuse to eat with a Korean OPC? That doesn't seem to be substantiated here. You know, that he talks about real fellowship, have real fellowship before the Lord. Have these gentlemen at any point said that they do not have real fellowship with Christians of other ethnicities? So it's begging the question here. It is assuming the argument prematurely. This has not been substantiated. This isn't actually what we're talking about. So hopefully, as we continue on, they will actually address the definitions that they gave for these positions. Carries on. It is also reflected in early local churches having mixed ethnicity members, Romans 16, 1 through 15, that shared communion together, which is the highest act of fellowship. First off, sharing communion is not the highest act of fellowship. It is certainly up there. But I think the highest act of fellowship is marriage. All right. I am much closer to my wife than I am to the people at church with whom I share communion. Obviously, I share a bed with my wife. I do not share a bed with everybody at my church. I'm not a Quaker. All right. So that's a little nitpicky. But shared communion together, the highest act of fellowship. Okay, that is also, again, begging the question. If an African-American Christian was visiting Pastor McAtee's church, would he refuse him communion? Have you asked him? Would Michael Spangler refuse communion to a Korean Presbyterian? Would Michael Hunter refuse communion to a Chinese Anglican? Maybe because he's Anglican, but this seems like a very strange position to take, especially for a denomination with closed communion, which I'm not sure if Knappark churches are open or closed communion or guarded table, whatever their position is. But for example, Lutherans, the LCMS anyway, holds to a closed communion. Mm-hmm. You cannot partake in communion unless you are LCMS. I have visited Sean's church. Sean, you've seen me at your church. I've been there twice. Did I take communion at your church?
No, sir. But you know who can take communion? The blackety black kid who's got the hairdo from the bad guy from Black Panther, where it's like kind of shaved on the side and it's like dreads kind of going off on the other direction. Take communion with that guy all the time. So I don't know why this.
Well, Sean, I think that means that you are denying me the highest act of fellowship.
Well, I'm definitely denying you the highest act of fellowship by your definition.
Yeah, by this definition given here. I mean, what? Yeah. I mean, this is
it's
wild.
So crazy.
It's very inconsistent.
I want to say something before you get too far from the Acts 10 conversation, because I was like, I need to reread this real quick to make sure I'm not crazy. Because it's another thing where it's like their addresses, it doesn't make sense. Like the things that they're using to back up their points scripturally does not make sense. I'm going to read from Acts 10. This is starting in verse 9. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven open and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. So he is in... he's at the house of a guy named Simon. He's a tanner, which means that his house is full of unclean, dead animals. He's in Joppa, which is essentially Tel Aviv.
So these would have been clean animals, but the act of killing them and stacking their hides renders them unclean, right? Because dead animals are unclean.
I'm sure he also had like some pigskin type things going on in there. I'm sure he did, right? Because he's a tanner, but he's not like necessarily like Jewish, right? Simon the tanner guy. But Cornelius comes there. The Peter is not like, no, Lord, I will not sit with Cornelius because he is racially different from me. Like, that is not the conversation being had. Conversation is, Lord, from my birth, I have not disobeyed the covenant that I was born into. That is what he is saying. That he's not saying, I will not eat with this Roman. That's not the point of this story at all. Mm-hmm. It's about what is kosher.
The purpose of those animals is God saying, do not call unclean what I've called clean. And then here come Gentiles, believers, whom God says, hey, these people I have called clean. All right. So it's not Peter saying, oh, I won't eat with them. Oh, I won't fellowship with them. It's God reiterating the gospel has gone to the Gentiles. Here are Gentiles. I have called them clean. But one of the points that I wanted to make too is not only is this off the base there, but he says, reflected in early local churches having mixed ethnicity members that shared communion together, which is the highest act of fellowship. These churches even had mixed ethnicity leadership who ministered together across ethnic lines. Man, I'm so glad that never led to any kind of problems. Now, in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. What is that if not problems arising because of a mixed ethnicity church?
A Hellenist, that's black people, right? Hellenists?
Oh, no, it's you would think by the movie coming out soon that would include black people, but actually it's referring to Jews or Greeks, white people.
Greeks,
So the Hebrews are neglecting the widows of the Hellenists. And then the 12 summoned the multitude of the disciples and said, "You are really bad people for neglecting these people who are not any distinction from you, because all ethnicities are the same, and you should feel really bad about that." Oh, wait, that's not what it says. Verse 2, then the 12 summoned the multitude of the disciples and said, "It is not desirable that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. Therefore, brethren, seek out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word." And the saying pleased the whole multitude. And they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, and Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas. Sean, are these Hebrew names? Timon,
no.
Parmenas, Nicholas, a proselyte from Antioch, whom they set before the apostles, and knew when they had prayed, they laid hands on them. Then the word of God spread, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. All right, so what you have here is a mixed ethnic group, a mixed ethnicity inside the church that leads to ethnic conflict. And the solution was to seek out deacons of the same ethnicity to ensure that the ethnic minority were being cared for.
So this is representation, but what was the terminology we used in the last episode with Samuel when we were talking about the difference between like representation? But I forget what it was. But basically, this is saying like, well, we need Jews to represent Jews, and we need Hellenists to represent Hellenists.
Yeah, it seems like that's actually what's going on here. Is they say, look, the Greeks are not being represented; they're not being ministered to appropriately by Hebrews. Let's appoint some Greeks who come from that community, come from that culture, that ethnicity, who have that favoritism toward their own people, that good, appropriate. Wait a minute, that's starting to sound kind of kinist. You know, you want to have people who. What was the definition that was given for kinism up at the top of this page? Love of one's own kind is a natural and biblical duty. It's kind of what that sounds like, man. It sounds like they said these Greeks have a love for their own kind and that they will fulfill their natural duty. So let's appoint Philip, which is a Greek name, but that could go either way, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas. Those are Greeks. All right? that is the mixed ethnicity that he's talking about this church having. And it immediately, in the life of the apostles in the first generation, led to ethnic conflict in the church. And the resolution to that conflict was something that looks an awful lot like a form of segregation. Notice it's not negative segregation, it's positive segregation. Let's get some Greek people appointed to be leaders in the church who can serve these Greek widows who need help from the church. That would be kind of like if you have a bunch of Hispanics in your church and the church gets together and says, hey, there's a bunch of Hispanics who don't speak good English. We would like to have a translator who can translate for the Spanish speakers in this church. Well, now you have a mixed ethnicity church. Let me tell you something. I have been in a church that did that. And eventually what happened was the ethnic minority of Hispanics eventually got so large that they separated and became a different church. The two churches remained sister churches. They had that highest act of fellowship, except they weren't taking communion together anymore because they were in two separate buildings. They went from a mixed ethnic church to mono-ethnic churches. Or at least the Hispanic church became a mono-ethnic church. And the reason they did that is because they outgrew their fellowship together. And then they self-segregated. This was not something that they were doing because white people don't like Hispanics or Hispanics don't like white people. This was not something born out of enmity. And yet it happened naturally. And I'm inclined to say it's a good thing for Hispanics, for Tejanos, to be able to have a church that they can go to and fellowship with other people like them, speaking their language, coming from their culture, sharing their race. Is that a bad thing?
I want to do this last paragraph, and then we can save the rest for fellow or follow-up episodes, because this paragraph really sums up what I was trying to say. The inconsistency is in the things before. I'll just read the full paragraph. What the New Testament expresses regarding race relations and covenantal inclusion, the Old Testament demonstrates as well. In the institution of the Passover, God made provision for the full inclusion of the Gentiles into Israel via the rite of circumcision, which was for an adult a profession of faith. Strangers sojourning in the land could become as a native of the land and partake of the Passover as an Israelite, demonstrating the reality that those who were children of Abraham were always children by faith. Now, when they say what the New Testament expresses regarding race relations and covenantal inclusion, the Old Testament demonstrates as well. What does it mean in that passage that we just read? I think it was Acts 10, when Peter says, like, you know, I have kept your law and not associated with these people. So was God just like, no, I didn't actually mean it that way. That was actually a misunderstanding. No. What does it mean that this veil has been torn? Right? This dividing wall of hostility. What does that mean? What you're saying the wall never existed. So how is the wall divided now? Which one is it? Because you started by saying the New Testament shows clearly that all those divisions no longer exist. And now you're saying
those divisions never existed.
Yeah, it never existed. Christ tore down 0 walls of hostility because the wall never existed. The wall was always in your mind, man. Like I just don't understand this argument here. It's so, because what they want to say is, well, they want to start out by saying, like, we're Christians, we don't do the bad thing anymore. But then, of course, you have to step back in order to maintain some semblance of orthodoxy and say, well, actually, the bad thing never existed because we're not dispensationalists, or whatever reason that they have in their head. It's just so crazy that they would. And then there's just some where they're talking about like circumcision, which was for an adult a profession of faith, not for a child though. Apparently,
not for a child though.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's some interesting theology there, because I guess
it's also very strange too, because I don't remember anywhere in the Bible where it says, by the way, your circumcision is your profession of faith. I thought this was a Presbyterian denomination, but they're sounding very Baptist. First off, circumcision is a profession of faith, but only for adults. I mean, dude, this is Glazer, are you a Presbyterian?
Yeah.
Do you even presbytery, bro?
I don't really know where they're going with some of this, where they're talking about like strangers sojourning in the land could become as a native of the land. Is that what that means, as a native of the land, or treat them the same way in this regard? It doesn't mean they have citizenship. That's not how that works.
You know what else it doesn't mean? It doesn't mean they can enter into the inner court. You know what else
they just mentioned
mean? It doesn't mean it also doesn't mean that they can inherit property. You know what else it doesn't mean? It doesn't mean that their children will be considered a full Israelite, because that takes 4 generations. Read the Old Testament, guys. If you get folded into the nation of Israel, it takes 4 generations before your children are considered a full Israelite and are able to enter into the inner court.
Does that mean that the children have to be quatroons or octoroons before that they're... I'm trying to figure the math on that.
Yeah.
Like how that...
because
that might be where the...
essentially
where the Virginia...
would be quadroon,
Okay. I was like, because that might be where the octoroon law comes from in like the...
I think that would be octoroon by the time you take it to that generation. I forget if it's 3 or 4 generations.
Yeah.
But
then it says, okay, demonstrating the reality that those who were children of Abraham were always children by faith.
Unrelated.
Again, this is my issue with this. What exactly does covenant theology say about who were children of Abraham? Because from what I understand about what Presbyterians are arguing, that children of Abraham by faith is in a whole other world from circumcision, right? Like, you're circumcised. Yeah, you're in the covenant, but you're not actually saved unless you have this faith. Then you're in the inner covenant. There's an outer covenant and inner covenant. And so I don't understand what this argument is saying, because are you treating them as a native of the land, which is a like circumcision-based thing, not a faith-based thing?
Well, right? And then also as a native of the land, that is not necessarily a religious distinction.
Right. It's not.
That is a cultural distinction and a judicial distinction. Where, people who were not Israelites were always allowed to come to the temple and worship in the outer court. You did not have to become circumcised and become as a native of the land to do so. The Queen of Sheba came to Solomon and worshipped at the temple with him. She did not have to go and circumcise all of her manservants to do that. Okay, the outer court was open to anyone who wanted to come and worship the one true triune God. And the inner court was reserved for the people who were a native of the land, who were circumcised. And if you wanted to get into that inner court, it took more than circumcision to do so. It took a generational homogeneous blending. So that is another inconsistency too. And that is something that we're going to continue to see as the positive argument, which I don't think is ever really made in this paper. They just kind of assume this positive case that, there's no distinction now. But at the same time, they're always backfilling that, well, there is a distinction, but there's not a distinction. It's a distinction without a difference, but it used to exist, but it never existed. They're all over the place. A wise man once told me that inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument. And what I'm seeing here is a lot of inconsistency. We're taking something that is a judicial and cultural distinction, and now we're applying it to salvation, which, while salvation did have ethnic kind of markers in the Old Testament, it was never exclusively so. I mean, you had people who were not Hebrews in the Old Testament who worshiped the true God. People who were prophets of the true God who were not Israelites. So it was not ever exclusive in that way. What was exclusive was the line of promise, the coming Messiah. So we'll read this one last paragraph.
Yeah, I was going to say that is
for tonight, because we're almost right there, and we'll pick up with Westminster. And boy, this next section on Westminster, it's a doozy, and we will cover it in part 2 of this. But let's finish out with this segment here. We see this racially inclusive reality of God's covenant people also demonstrated in the many lawful interracial marriages affirmed and blessed in the Old Testament, including Joseph's marriage with Potiphar the Egyptian, and notable biracial children Manasseh and Ephraim. We'll get back to that. Moses' marriage with a Cushite woman, Salmon's marriage to Rahab, a Canaanite, Boaz's marriage to Ruth, a Moabitess, and Solomon's marriage to the daughter of Pharaoh, the latter two being in the bloodline of Jesus Christ, who himself did not have the pure racial blood demanded by kinism. Ooh, kinis. Sean, when he defined kinism, did you see anything in here about pure racial blood? Let's read it again real quick. The belief that God has ordained the existence of distinct ethnic and racial groups and that these groups should be preserved and protected. It is the conviction that the love of one's own kind is a natural and biblical duty, and the modern drive for multiculturalism and universalism is a rebellion against the created order. Did you hear anything about not one drop or pure racial blood? I think he missed that part. He snuck it in. I mean, it wasn't in the definitions, but now all of a sudden it's part of the definition. In the definition of kinism that he gave, like I said earlier, big enough that you could drive a truck through. But now all of a sudden he's tightening down the definition. Jesus himself did not have the pure racial blood demanded by kinism. Citation needed, sir.
It's so funny because he then says it's vital to note that interreligious marriage was and is still now prohibited, but interracial marriage between two professing believers was never prohibited.
Never?
Okay. Now here's my thing. Moses' marriage to a Cushite woman. Does it say that the Cushite woman was a fellow believer? Is that the argument?
Wasn't Potiphar, Joseph's wife, wasn't she the daughter of the priest of On? I don't think that was. I mean, it was. Maybe now's a good time to cover that. That may not even have been an interracial marriage. Okay, because debatably, and I disagree with this timeline, but the majority of Christians believe that the timeline would line up, that the pharaohs of Egypt would have been Hebrews. Okay, they would have been Semites, in which case that's not an interracial marriage. But it's also certainly an interfaith marriage because she's daughter of the priest of On.
Yeah. It's also
it is exactly the opposite of what you just said. It's not interracial and it is interreligious.
Yeah. It's interesting that they mentioned that Well, first of all of these examples are basically the man is in the position where he is taking in a wife,
Correct.
and disregarding everything from her lineage and saying like, no, you're this religion now.
You're mine.
You
now.
are this people now. Yeah. Because
And
that's
notice,
the way that
you know, quite famously, Boaz's marriage to Ruth. What was it that Ruth said when she came to Israel? Your people will be my people, and your God my God. It was not merely your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Ruth disinherited herself from her Moabite ancestry.
Yeah.
She spurned her Moabite ancestry to become an Israelite.
Which also, can we just, okay, so Moab was one of the sons of Lot, right?
Yeah,
do I have that right?
Also a Hebrew. Yep.
By his own daughter.
By his own daughter.
So
yep.
Already, okay, so if you take, dude, I've done the percentages on this. It's kind of gross, honestly. If you look at if you look at the percentages of Terah, the father of Abraham, look at like what percentage of some of these people's ancestor is just Terah. Like for a large portion of them, it's like 50% of their ancestry is just the same
or more.
dude.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so, they're so closely related. All these people. Oh, she was a Moabitess. Oh, really? Okay, so you have Lot is the nephew of Abraham. I have that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And then his son by his own daughter, right? So
his son,
very closely,
grandson.
Yeah, very, very closely related to Abraham to begin with, right? And then you have to the point where when Rebecca sees that Edom marries it's a woman from an Ishmaelite. No, I thought it was an Ishmaelite woman.
I believe,
or is it a
Canaanite? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Somebody that she doesn't racially approve of, and it basically tells Jacob, "You need to go marry your cousin because I don't want you marrying outside this bloodline.
These foreign wives are driving me into the grave."
Yeah. So, yeah, like I'm gonna kill myself because your brother intermarried.
Yeah, and then I believe it was after that, after his mom had this chimp out moment, that he went and married the Ishmaelite. He was like, "Okay, I'll go get a cousin." After that, yeah.
So you already have this like super incestuous situation, incestuous by any standard, really, except possibly Muslim these days. But,
well, I think it's still called incest. They just don't have a problem with it,
right? But the all of this is just it's so insane that they would use these as examples, because then you start saying, oh, Jesus himself didn't have the pure racial blood demanded by kinism. I don't understand what they think that means, because like the fact that we even have the category white people kind of proves that we're not really all that into the purity aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Because what I call,
I know a guy who, and he's not kinist or race realist or any of these things. He's just a normal American guy, but he's really into his ancestry, and he's English and he's Scotch Irish, and he's very proud of the fact that he's Scotch Irish, and he wants to marry a girl who is Scotch Irish in the Midwest, right? He's from Missouri, and he's still unmarried. He's a little bit of a dork. He's a little bit of a geek, but he's looking for that. And he's looking for that because it's a preference that he has, because it's a heritage that he appreciates. And he's not doing it, like I said, out of any kind of racial animus or anything like that. It's simply because he wants to have that kind of what he sees as cool, interesting, shared heritage. And is that sinful? I mean, if he's doing it from different motives, he's not one of these guys who's reading Iron Ink, right? He's just a guy who appreciates the inheritance that he has and the history that he shares. Is it sinful for him to do so? But like you said, Salmon's marriage to Rahab, we talked about how Ruth said, your people will be my people and your God, my God. What did Rahab do? She betrayed her entire city and allowed them to be murdered. She sheltered spies. She switched sides. Moses' marriage with a Cushite woman. Again, this is something that is hotly contested in history. Is Moses' wife a black African? Because you see this a lot where people talk about, Moses was married to a black African woman. We know the name of her dad, and his heritage was not Hamite. That will come up later because they get into the whole curse of Ham, Canaanite nonsense later on. But Moses' wife was not, at least the first one, because one of the interpretations of those passages is that he may have had more than one wife. But if you're trying to raise that question, almost certainly the person that you are referencing here was not a Hamite. It would have been a Semitic woman from a Semitic tribe living in a Cushite, in a Hamite area of the world.
You're saying Zipporah is the Cushite woman.
Yeah. If you're conflating those two people, which may or may not be the case. But so for just to sum up, Joseph's marriage to an Egyptian, who very well may have been Semitic, Moses' marriage to a Cushite, Zipporah, who may very well have been Semitic, Salmon's marriage to Rahab, who betrayed her entire city, Boaz's marriage to Ruth, a Semite, who also disenfranchised herself from her people, and Solomon's marriage to the daughter of Pharaoh. Solomon, who had over 100 wives and like 1,000 concubines.
Yeah, of course he had a little interracial mixture in there because he wanted buffet.
Your entire argument then is resting on Solomon, and that's your argument for interracial marriage.
Crazy, man.
That's pretty wild. Pretty wild.
I want to bring up another one that I'm not surprised they didn't bring up. Phinehas, who is the son of Eleazar and therefore the grandson of Aaron, in Numbers 25, stops a plague among the Israelites because he sees an Israelite man and a Midianite woman together, and they were told not to be together. And there was a plague because all the Israelite men were taking Midianite women that they were told, you do not take women from these people. And so Phinehas came and threw a spear and pinned both of them to a wall.
Yeah, and stuck them right into the ground. Murdered them.
And for his troubles, he was given a covenant of peace and an everlasting priesthood. So that's what happens when you spear an interracial couple that causes plague among your people. You get an everlasting priesthood.
Quite interesting.
Weird that.
So to sum up this section, he finishes it off with this sentence: to conflate interreligious marriage with interracial marriage is to violate basic logic.
Yeah, no
To
kidding.
conflate
Wow.
interreligious
Crazy.
marriage with interracial marriage is to violate basic logic. All right. As a sentence, this is a valid statement.
Right.
What did we just establish about Joseph and his wife? According to the standard timeline, Joseph married a Hebrew who was the daughter of a priest of a foreign god. And you called it an interracial marriage, when what it was an interracial or an interreligious marriage. Who's the one violating basic logic here? Also, I want to point out, again, racial bloodline demanded by kinism. If you go up to his definition of kinism, it says racial groups and ethnic groups should be preserved and protected, and that the love of one's own kind is natural and biblical duty. Nowhere in this definition does it say that interracial marriage is per se forbidden. And yet that is what he is using as his definition. Race realism down here says ought not to be, which include mixed race marriages, among other things. So what I'm getting from these definitions that you've laid out at the very beginning of your paper is safe, legal, and rare. That is one of the working definitions for this, is that interracial marriage, at best, in this, according to this definition, which I'm not necessarily fond of the wording here, but it still can be understood to be safe, legal, and rare. And yet, when we go down to here, he gives us 4 examples across how many thousands of years of Israelite history in order to say that this is something that is not forbidden, in order to say that this is something that, is perfectly licit in every single case. That is a different standard. To say something is 100% licit is very different from saying it is not standard or ought to be avoided.
I think, what it really comes down to, and it usually comes down to this, is essentially, if you believe that race exists, and it is something that when choosing a partner, you need to at least acknowledge, which is to say, go by Doug Wilson's understanding of interracial marriage. If you do that, you're in sin. If you believe race exists, you are in sin. I've said that for years. I mean it wholeheartedly. I've yet to be proven wrong. All of this always comes down to, do you believe race exists? If yes, straight to hell. If no, well, then we can, have a conversation if you're going to hell or not. But if you believe that is what a racist is to these people. A racist is someone who believes that race exists. Full stop. That is the sin right there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's in the name. Race realist. If you believe that race is real, okay, if you believe a thing is real, then you believe that it has real ramifications. If you believe that cars are real, you believe that they have an effect on daily life, including transportation and the economy. If you believe that dogs are real, you believe that they have an effect on cultural life, in how you socialize, in how you secure your belongings, in how you guard your house, in how you keep your living room clean. If you believe that shoes are real, it has an effect on how you walk outside and inside. If you believe that race is real, it has an effect on how you deal with your fellow man. because real things have real consequences, both good and bad. And that means that there are good consequences of race. Race is not simply a bad thing. God did not make a mistake when he laid out the boundaries for the nations in Genesis. When he created the nations and gave them their boundaries, he didn't do that by mistake. He was not blindsided by his own activity. When he separated the people at the Tower of Babel by confusing their languages so that they would spread out and go and fill the earth like he commanded at first Adam and then Noah. That was not a mistake. And there are consequences for that, both good and bad. And ultimately what this comes down to, like you said, Sean, is if you believe that this is real, then you believe that there are effects in the real world from it. And if you don't believe it's real, then you have to jump through a lot of hoops to try and prove that it's not. Because all of reality cries out against you. If there are races, then there are disparities. If there are different kinds of cars, then different cars will do different things. If sports cars exist, then some cars are faster than others. If trucks exist, then some cars can carry more than others. If different races exist, then some people run faster than others. If different races exist, then some people are better at math than others. India, 1/3 of the world's entire population are Hindustani, which is a very large kind of racial category. There are lots of sub-races in that group. The nation of India houses 1/3 of the world's entire population. They have something like 7 Olympic medals. The island of Jamaica has a few 100,000 or a few million people. It is very small. They have thousands of Olympic medals. Why is that? Because Jamaicans can run and jump very well, and Indians cannot. That is a racial disparity. That is a racial disparity that lots of people are willing to observe and admit. Some countries which have a racial makeup of Africans are unable to maintain infrastructure such as railroads, streets, and tall buildings. Some countries, which are made up of Europeans, do not have those same problems. Some countries like China win awards for mathematics every single year. And some countries like America have never been able to get those awards until they imported Chinese people and put them on their team. Because intelligence is also a racial aspect just as much as the Achilles tendon. Because brain size is a physical thing. The size of your cranium is a 1-to-1 correlation with the size of your brain, which is a 1-to-1 correlation with how intelligent you are. And there are racial effects. There are heritable that you inherit from your children, from your parents, how large your head is when you're born and how big your brain is going to be when you're an adult. And that has an effect on your intelligence. That, at the very beginning of this paper, was said to be an unchristian belief, something that is scientifically, observably provable, something he spent zero time teaching us from Scripture was unchristian to believe. Something that has no effect on your salvation. Something that has no effect on whether or not you can partake in communion. Whether or not you can be a good husband and father to your children. Whether you could obey God's righteous law. Those are different things. And for him to conflate those and say you are not a Christian if you believe X, Y, and Z about race is a logical inconsistency. He has not yet established that. He said it, but he has not yet established that. And as we continue this special, as we go through this ARP paper that they have put forward, I'm afraid that we're not going to get very many answers to these questions that we've raised. But we're going to continue doing this, and we're going to see where this goes. We're going to see if he lays out the argument, if he shows us from Scripture where these things are wrong. So before we close, Sean, final thoughts on this whole debacle?
Yeah, I'm hoping that this leads to a mass exodus. I mean, obviously, this denomination has just gone off the rails, and I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys. Those of you who are stuck in it, I'll probably be running into something similar in the LCMS. I don't know. I don't know what you can do as a member if you're, if you're reading this statement and saying like, hey, that sounds like everything that everyone has always believed until like 1965. If that's something you notice, as we've noticed, then
something they even admitted in this paper, 19th and 20th century Presbyterianism. Something that he will later contradict, by the way, in this very paper, just like he's self-contradicted on more than one point already.
I don't have a good answer for what to do with this if you're stuck on the inside of this, unless you're willing to go somewhat scorched earth and put yourself out there and be like, hey, this sounds like you're trying to attack me, but these definitions are garbage, and they were written by the kind of people who would take communion bread home and eat it in the car on the way home. I mean, well, what do you do with that? I mean, these aren't serious people.
Is this guy even a Presbyterian at this point? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, that's
the
really
Pope Catholic was meant to be kind of a joke.
Yeah.
But as we see today, that's becoming a serious question. And are the people who run this denomination even Presbyterian? That is not an unserious question these days.
Yeah,
I say this as a person who is not a Presbyterian.
My real problem with the statement is that it's created, seemingly at least, to be an axe that someone like Eli McGowan can use against people. Because I've seen him use similar things as like, you're outside the church. Do you repent? Do you whatever? As if he's the arbiter of
what
orthodoxy.
Is and is not. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I it's so crazy the people who allow for that kind of behavior and even encourage it at times. And then, like the Benjamin Glaser, that's the guy that wrote this, right? Like, that's his name.
Yeah, he's the one who took the lead on the project.
Yeah, and so he'll sit there and he'll try to deny and all this, like no, I don't support what Eli McGowan does. But I mean, he's the one.
He's the one loading his rifle.
Yeah, he's like, oh, here's some things you could use to attack these people. Which is crazy because like his like banner on Twitter is him like marking Confederate graves, right? Like he's basically at this point,
they're not Confederate graves.
He has done them though, in the past. If that's not what that picture exactly is, but he's essentially with statements like this, just saying like, hey guys, please just eat me last. Mm-hmm. Those are Confederate graves.
No, you're right, because they are the pointed ones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's basically just like, doing the whole like, hey, you can eat telling the lion, you could eat the other zebras, just make sure you eat me last. It's just so self-defeating. I don't know why he does this. He's setting himself up for failure. He'll eventually be kicked out for even acknowledging that you should honor dead Confederates. I mean, that's high treason these days.
Yeah. And as we'll see, as we continue reading this, he's going to try and tell us that, Dabney isn't who Dabney is. He's going to try and tell us that the Presbyterians in the South didn't believe what they believed, but when they did, it was bad. And they didn't actually, but really they did, but it was bad when they did. It's very incoherent. It's very self-contradictory. He's going to talk about Dabney. He's going to talk about Rushdoony, and he's going to try and salvage them to his cause by ignoring their words and misrepresenting them. But we'll cover that when we cover it in future in future installments of these episodes. Yeah. In summary, I'm afraid that what we've seen so far is not coherent and not consistent. And I would like to hold out hope and tell you that, don't worry, guys, it's going to be better. But in all reality, this is only going to get worse. As we saw, he gave definitions at the beginning and then seemingly had no purpose in doing so because he did not hold himself to those definitions.
Yeah, nothing built in this whole thing. It was just kind of throwing mud at the wall, hoping some would stick. Yeah, it just didn't make any sense.
So anyhow, that being said, folks, we are 3 pages in to what is essentially a 30-page document. So if we continue at the rate we're going, it's going to be a 10-part series. Hopefully we'll actually speed up a little bit. But we appreciate y'all for giving this your time of day, for listening to this, watching this. If you are in this denomination, or if this is something that matters to you, whatever denomination you're in, and it does matter to you, I'm afraid to say, please consider sharing this with your friends. Share this with your pastor. Share this with people who you think need to hear it, because this is only going to continue. The brakes on this train have been blown off and we're going downhill. All right. And the only end of this is that there's going to be a dead engineer with his hand on the throttle, scalded to death by the steam, because this is not slowing down. There are no brakes on this train. And unless people like Glazer are put in their place, or more appropriately, taken out of their place of authority and replaced with people who are at least coherent and consistent, you're not going to see any kind of improvement in your denomination. But with that said, folks, we hope that this has been helpful to you. Stay tuned for future installments. We appreciate any help that you can give us. Our links are in the description. There is a page to support this effort if you would like to do so. buymeacoffee.com/for-future-generations, link in the description. Share this with your friends. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if this is something that you would like to see. And watch our live shows. This is a pre-recorded show that we'll be putting out. And Sean and I do this every or almost every Sunday night, except for when holidays and special family situations interfere. Please keep us in prayer. Please pray for your pastors. Pray for your denominational leaders. Pray that God will give them the spine that they need to stand up for what is good, what is beautiful, what is true. And don't be afraid to speak the truth. Speak the truth in love, but don't forget to speak the truth. With that said, folks, we hope that you have a wonderful day, and farewell.